Hey folks, I'm back. I've taken a short break from making videos, and now I'm rested and ready to jump back in. The other night I was hanging out with Crashes. You can find his link in the description box. During that stream, I made a comment about psychology and the concept of collective narcissism. I received a few requests to elaborate on that idea. With that in mind, today's video will not be a classic debunk of flat earth and other nonsense. Instead, I'll be doing a short 3-part series on the topic of the psychology of conspiracy theories. This video will lay the groundwork for the concept of collective narcissism by examining the general personality traits and motivating factors which contribute to conspiracy thinking. I have noticed in my emails that there is a misconception about psychological concepts, particularly when it comes to the ideas of groupthink and collective narcissism. So before we get too deep into this topic, I would like to address the basic differences between them. Contrary to some of the comments I've received after that live hangout, groupthink is not exactly the same thing as group narcissism. Groupthink is a pattern of behavior which a group exhibits, which may or may not be a typical pattern of behavior for group members as individuals. Groupthink can be thought of as a herd mentality, where an individual begins to follow the group actions even though on their own they might not normally behave in that manner. Groupthink does tend to have negative connotations to most people. And it should be pointed out here that in psychology we talk about both negative groupthink and positive groupthink. The difference being the motivations and outcomes within each type of group. While we can't argue both the strengths and deficits of positive groupthink, that isn't really the point of this particular video. We may visit that topic in a later video. So, moving on. Collective narcissism, on the other hand, is used to describe personality traits which can be used as a predictor for behaviors. Conspiracy theory groups like Flat Earth do exhibit such traits from time to time, as we will see while we explore this concept. So, in a nutshell, groupthink is about group actions, whereas collective narcissism is about personality traits within the group, which will be the topic of part 2 of this mini-series. So what is it about the personality traits and motivating factors of the conspiracy theorist? Are they really so different from the rest of society? The first question that comes to mind is, why do people fall into conspiracy theory groups in the first place? The answer is as complex and different as each human being is from one another. That being said, there are general similarities which seem to dominate the conspiracy theorist's background and personality. In general, people who fall into conspiracy theorist thinking are people who tend to be more suspicious, untrusting, eccentric. They need to feel special, with a tendency to regard the entire world as inherently dangerous. Now, individually, each of these personality traits are fairly common. We all have insecurities, fears, and occasional negative thinking. But it's how we learn to cope and deal with those less than ideal personality traits that makes the difference between a well-adjusted individual and someone who's prone to conspiratorial thinking. These personality traits tend to drive certain motivations within the conspiracy theorist's frame of mind. Now, we are all driven by these same basic motivations, but a conspiracy theorist will actually take these motivations to a very unhealthy degree. The first basic motivation is epistemic, which describes the very human need to make sense of chaotic and random events. We've all asked ourselves, why is this particular thing happening to me? Why did my loved one have to pass away? Why did I have to get fired at work? It's a very natural and normal thing to think and say in times of high stress. But in the mind of a conspiracy theorist, epistemic motivation becomes very dark, very twisted, very quickly. Conspiracy theorists will do things like finding the number 33 all over the place and blaming it on the Freemasons, or looking at pictures from space and deciding that they're CGI, not understanding the difference between CGI and composite, and decide that NASA is an evil organization which have been lying to us since its inception. The need and search for meaning in random events is so strong in a conspiracy theorist that casual explanations will just not do. Next, there is the existential motivation, which is the need for safety and security, the need to feel empowered. For most people, this includes gainful employment, stable housing, stable marriages or other relationships. And for some people, this includes engaging in the political process, attending debates, voting, all of which helps alleviate the feelings of isolation and disenfranchisement. For the conspiracy theorist, the need for safety and security, when coupled with the belief that the world is an inherently dangerous place, becomes all-consuming. They will look outward, well past the point of most people, finding danger in governments, fraternal organizations, and sometimes even within their own families. This quite often has the outcome of leading the individual to isolate and withdraw rather than engaging society on a healthy level. And finally, there is the social motivation, which is the desire to belong socially. As I've said before, we, as human beings, all have these needs. But in the conspiracy theorist, these needs seem to be exaggerated. Heightened by feelings of disenfranchisement, envy, and fear, the conspiracy theorist tends to find external reasons for their feelings and life condition rather than looking internally and taking responsibility for self-improvement. The conspiracy theorists tend to blame outside influences beyond their control. But herein lies the catch-22. Rather than improving their situation and alleviating the feelings of disenfranchisement, envy, and fear, conspiracy theories tend to heighten those emotions, causing further psychological harm. So rather than engaging socially and politically in a healthy way, the conspiracy theorist will become more isolated in their daily lives. The advent of the internet and social networking platforms have given conspiracy theorists a way to communicate within their group as they search for all the causes of their disillusionment and disenfranchisement. Because of the availability of internet access and social platforms, conspiracy theories are gaining in popularity. It's an argument known as argumentum ad populum, which is a logical fallacy that basically says, because it's popular, it must be true. To anyone with good critical thinking skills, this sounds like an absurd idea. A conspiracy theorist, however, seems to be willing to pause their critical thinking skills in favor of the need for social inclusion, where they hope to find fulfillment within the group. This brings us to our next concept of collective narcissism, which will be discussed in part 2 of this mini-series. I'd like to take a moment to reiterate, this series is meant to be a brief overview of certain psychological concepts rather than a college-level lecture. And as stated in the beginning of this video, it is not meant to diagnose, treat, or advise on mental health issues. If you or someone you know is struggling, please check with your local healthcare providers. If you are enjoying this series, please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons. And I hope you will join me next week for part 2. Until next time, gang, see you around the campfire.